morning, everybody, and I'd like to welcome our guest for today, the Right Honourable David Lammy MP. So born and raised in Tottenham, Mr Lammy won a choral scholarship to the King's School in Peterborough at age 11. He went on to study a law degree at SOAS and was admitted to the bar in 1994. In 1997 he crossed the pond to study a Masters at Harvard Law School, and on his return to the UK he became a Labour member of the Greater London Assembly. In June 2000 he entered Parliament via a by-election, and he has been MP for his native Tottenham ever since. David Lammy served as Minister of State for Culture and then Minister of State for Innovations, Universities and Skills for a total of 9 years under the last Labour government, and he became Privy Councillor in 2008. In 2014 he announced his intention to seek the Labour nomination for candidate to be the next Mayor of London. David Lammy is also an author of this book, Out of the Ashes, Britain After the Riots, which weaves together his personal bibliography with a social commentary, all against the backdrop of the 2011 London riots. If you haven't got hold of it already, I can highly recommend it. It's very engaging and it's thought-provoking, and in my view it's very refreshing as well. Mr Lammy has been an active MP, campaigning on a plethora of issues from unemployment to policing. He's been a powerful voice in the campaign to keep Tottenham Hotspur playing at White Hart Lane, and I know this is an issue close to his own heart. He's also chaired the all-party group on fatherhood, which seeks to raise the importance of this important topic in the 21st century. Talking of fatherhood, he has in the last few months, I believe, become a father for the 3rd time, so congratulations on that. And a few years down the line, we look forward to welcoming your daughter and your sons to the NCS. So we're delighted to have Mr Lammy speaking to us today in what I'm sure will be a very interesting address. Please join me now in welcoming the Right Honourable David Lammy.
Well, thank you very much. It's great to be here. I'm going to start, I think, do my contribution in 2 halves. The first half, I want to talk about me. No, I think I want to talk about where I'm from and say something about what I think success means. And then the second half, I'll get a bit more political and talk about where I think we're at. So the first thing is just to remind you, I'm standing here as a Member of Parliament. When I leave here today, I will go into the House of Commons. I've got a packed diary of lots of meetings. But at some point I will leave my office in those meetings and I will go into the House of Commons chamber. And when I stand up to ask, I think today it's the Home Secretary, a question, I am very aware that I am standing up as one of very few ethnic minority members of Parliament. I'm standing up as someone who was raised by a single mother. I'm standing up as someone who knows what it means to sometimes open the fridge when I was growing up and there wasn't much food in it. And, you know, it takes a considerable amount of confidence, frankly, to know yourself, to know you have something to contribute, and look at some of those men and women opposite you, most often men, who've been to Eton and been to Harrow, very posh schools with very posh accents, and think, what the hell am I doing here? What do I bring to this table? And so where does the confidence come to say, actually, I bring shed loads to this table, because there's a lot I've seen in my life. Where does that come and how does that begin? And so it's really important when I speak to a group of young people like you guys, that I just make it clear to you that I think there are 5 things that are the important ingredients of success, and I really hope that you reflect on these 5 things over the course of the next few years. Those 5 things are education, employment, aspiration, community, and parenting. And if all 5 of those things are going on, you are in paradise. Well, not quite in paradise, but you're in a good place that's called success. Sometimes you can't all be going on at the same time, but it's those 5 ingredients. So education, I hope I don't have to explain to you in this institution how important that is. You know, I am here as someone who went to primary school in Tottenham. I then got a little scholarship, a Billy Elliot moment, because I used to sing when I was younger to a big cathedral school in the middle of the country in Peterborough. I then came back to London to the School of Orient and African Studies. I then went to Harvard Law. Throughout that journey, I am so blessed with the teachers, lecturers, professors that I had. Many of them are still friends. And somehow I worked out that all you have to do in these educational institutions is turn up and steal what is in your teacher's brain for free. That's all you've got to do. And once you've worked that out, you're set. There's one other little problem, which is the noise. There was a little bit less noise when I was your age. There's a hell of a lot of noise in the system now, and it's distracting. And I'm beginning to think it was put there specifically to distract working class kids. Let me give you an example of the noise. Can everyone stand up? Here is an example of the noise. Sit down if you're on Twitter. It's too noisy. Well, that's more than half the glass. Sit down if you've got one of those Xbox Wii things at home. Sit down if you're on Facebook. We've got 4 Nobel laureates in the room. Congratulations. You can sit down now. But do you see my point? We are living in the midst of a technological revolution. It's driving profound change. It's great, a lot of it, but it's also hugely distracting for the purposes of coming into school, taking everything from your teacher's brains and having that ability, and this is what distinguishes those who can achieve and those who find it much harder, to revise, to basically hone what you've learned over a period and then deploy it in an exam. So don't ever get too distracted by the technological revolution that we're in that is pulling you away from that objective. I also mentioned employment, but I rather than just talk about employment, I want to talk about your prospects of creating employment, enterprise. I don't think enough is said to young people about what you can do for yourself. The job market out there is extremely competitive in London. The great thing is you're in this city. It's one of the best cities in the planet. There are parts of Britain where you could be at sixth form, and the truth is there's not much going on. Not much industry, not much jobs, not much prospects. And into that vacuum at the moment is coming a party called UKIP. And they're saying to the people of Clacton and the people of Hull and parts of the country in the north and on the south seaside coast that your politicians have failed you. There are not enough jobs for your kids. Our rents are rising. Food prices are going up. Cost of living is going up. Can't get a council house. And guess whose fault it is? It's the immigrants' fault. No immigrants around here, of course, but it's their fault. And we should pull out of Europe. as a consequence. These are two of the most ridiculous arguments currently in politics. They're not new, they're very old. It has traditionally been the case that far-right parties peddle this line. At its worst, it can be extremely dangerous. But here in London, there are real prospects for you. But it's competitive. Because it's such a great city, there are young people arriving from Australia and New Zealand and France and Poland. It's competitive. I had a go at Pret-a-Manger's not so long ago about why they didn't seem to employ local young people to serve those coffees. And what they said to me is, we find that the young British kids, they don't look you in the eye. I'm really glad as I look in this audience, you're all looking me in the eye. But I want a bit more from you than a job at Pret-a-Manger's, is the point. But it's competitive. And a bit of enterprise is necessary. I'm very lucky, I get to travel all over the world. All over the world. And I've got this little habit. When I'm in a country that I've never been to before, I like to go and find a barber's, a black barber's, to get my hair cut. And I like to go to the roughest part of town to get my hair cut, because you learn a lot. And a few months ago, I was in South Africa, and I was in Soweto, and I was sitting on the side of a road getting my hair cut. And this young 19-year-old man was cutting my hair with a razor blade. After about 10-15 minutes, he told me that he had been cutting hair for 6 weeks. I wish he told me that before I started. He had travelled from the Democratic Republic of the Congo, through Angola, through southern Africa, down to Soweto, and there he was. And I just reflected on his enterprise to get on with it and to be making a living, because he had lots of customers queuing up after me, in a very tough part of the world. And I reflected on, when I come back to Britain, do I see that enterprise in young people? We sometimes talk about enterprise and entrepreneurs as if everyone's got to be Bill Gates or Mark Zuckerberg. Enterprise is just the ability to do it for yourself, however small you start. I just want to leave that with you. I also talked about aspiration. I need to tell you, at every single stage of my life, I've been told I can't do something. I was told by Mrs. Parker, my careers teacher, that I would not get my GCSEs. In fact, she tried to persuade, I said to her, Mrs. Parker, I want to be a barrister. She said, David, I think you should be a fireman. I hate fire. Nothing against firemen. Prove Mrs. Parker wrong. A-level, you're not going to, you're not going to go to a Russell Group University. Proven wrong. You can't go to Harvard Law. Too expensive, really hard. Prove them wrong. You can't be an MP at the age of 26, 27. You mad. Prove them wrong. I've told you, I'm going to be the next Mayor of London. And you know what they're going to say? This business of aspiration and ambition is vital. It's tough. We're reliant in part on the people around us and others to lift us up. And it's also knowing that you do fail things along the way. I'm a really, really bad driver. In fact, I can't drive. You just don't want me in a car. You know, we don't succeed at everything. But in that core, knowing who you are, knowing where you stand in the ground and what you stand for, seems to me to be very, very important. Community is key to that. This is a community. And it's partly why I am the MP for Tottenham. I'm proud of having been born in that constituency. There are fewer and fewer members of Parliament that know their own patch, that were born and raised and know the streets in their constituency. I grew up between a small little terraced house and Broadwater Farm Estate, where my aunt lived. And that's what I bring to the table. But I'm also proud that 40 years later, my parents have now died. They had a little flat in Finsbury Park. 5 of them shared it as a bedsit when they arrived in this country. Many of you will come from immigrant backgrounds and will understand that. I am proud that even though they're not alive, I've managed to go back to the same street where they started out in the 1950s and 60s and buy the whole house. I now live in a 4-storey house. That's a journey that I have made. I'm proud of my working class roots, but I'm proud also to be able to give my own children things that I could never have dreamed of. That's the journey, that's the aspiration. It's down to the community from which I represent. And in the end, it comes back to parenting. I didn't have a father, as I said to you. He walked out on us and it was extremely hard, and I've spent a lot of my political career talking about the importance of fatherhood in our national life. I talk about it in my book in one of the chapters. But even if you don't have a father, there's something called in loco parentis. You can always find adults that can become kind of proxy parenting type figures. That's certainly been my experience at every single stage of my life, having mentors, sometimes asking people, will you be my mentor? Can I keep coming back to you and asking your advice? And most often people say yes, and they take an interest in your lives. We are nothing if we haven't got that kind of parenting structure. And for those of you who are men in the audience, put off parenting for a considerable time. And when you do, stick with it. Let me get to the politics of where we are at the moment. We've got 6 political parties getting more than 5% in the polls. This is an extremely interesting time to be of 6th form age. Politics feels fragmented. One of the great themes of the 20th century is effectively countries struggling with the collapse of empire. And Britain has certainly been one of those countries. Thinking about what is the great in Great Britain. And in that journey, it's possible that for us here in London, and for much of us in the south east of the country, moving to a new economy, begun under Margaret Thatcher, largely a service-led economy, lots of retail and shops and consumption. Got the city here in London as well. It's not too bad. But in other parts of Britain, it feels very different. And effectively, Britain is still struggling with a mining industry that's gone, a steelworks that's gone, manufacturing that's largely left, and parts of our cities and towns not really responding to what they should do, and living quite, not close, but living off an economy that have the city and some of the things we've got here down in the south. It's led to fragmentation. It's led to parties like UKIP. It's led to the SNP in Scotland and a different perspective on the kind of country we want to be. It's shaking politics up. And at the same time, the Labour Party, the Conservative Party have moved to the centre ground, fighting over what can sometimes feel like quite a small agenda, but a few floating voters in the centre ground of politics. The theme I talk about in my book, I call the 2 quiet revolutions that have happened in my lifetime and affect your lifetime. They're both liberal revolutions. The first is the liberal revolution of the 1960s. It's the revolution at its best that we identify with people like Gandhi and Martin Luther King and Nelson Mandela. these people that gave us our rights. It's the revolution that took working people out of factories in this country at the beginning of the last century. It's the revolution that means that here as we stand in 2015, you can, all of you, if you want to, can do something in your lives. You can self-actualize in your life. In this room, not that long ago, a woman could absolutely not do what she wanted to do in her life. In this room, someone who is gay could absolutely not marry and love and be who they want to be in their own lifetime. And in this room full of ethnic minorities, absolutely, not that long ago, you could absolutely not be and do who you want to be. So the 1960s brought us, and if you wanted to sum up the 20th century, the word I would use to sum up the 20th century is freedom. That's the word I would use. Freedom, by the end of the 20th century, becomes the big theme. The difficulty in 2015, of course, is if we all have rights and I am free to do what I want to do, then how do we come back together again and also assert responsibility? And what does rights become when, as I saw in the riots, it's my right to help myself to smash into JD Sports to get that pair of trainers I've been wanting for weeks. It's my right to help myself to that Xbox. It's my right to X, basically. Where are our responsibilities? How do we come back together, and how do we assert other ideas that were very important in the earlier part of the 20th century? Collective ideas. We used to use this phrase, solidarity. These are ideas about how we come back together. And it's interesting, the technology I talked to you about before is also driving individualism. A kind of hyped up, souped up individualism. Though we struggled to come together. The second revolution of the 20th century is another liberal revolution. Liberal is a really important word in these contexts. This is the economic liberal revolution of Margaret Thatcher, Ronald Reagan, continued to some extent by Gordon Brown and Tony Blair. It can be summed up very simply in parts, which is the revolution to make as much money as you want, however you want. It's what led to the crash. It's what led to a huge housing crisis in London. It's what's led to an age of total consumption. We all want to shop, shop, shop. And there are real downsides to that economic revolution, because inequality in our society now is standing in such a bad place. There are 640,000 Londoners not able to make a living wage. What do I mean by that? I mean people who are on a minimum wage, but that's not enough for their homes. So what happens is you have to work 2 or 3 jobs. Some of your parents might fall into this category. I know my mother did. 2 or 3 jobs, or all hours, basically. Well, what I say to people is, if mum and dad, or dad, is working all hours to make ends meet, who's raising the children? This is very, very serious. A few days ago, I was going to the United States of America. It was 5 o'clock in the morning. I got into my cab outside my house to take me to Heathrow. I was half asleep. I was hoping that the cab driver did not know who I was. But 15 minutes into the journey, with me falling asleep on the back row, probably dribbling, he said, "Are you Mr. Lammy?" Yes, I am. He said, I've got a problem. I said, what's your problem? He told me a story about his two nephews. This man was from Bangladesh. Getting on a plane, aged 19 and 17, travelling to Spain, and then to Turkey, and ending up in Syria. And this man was distraught, absolutely distraught at the prospect of his two nephews clearly being killed in Syria. Now his complaint was that the police, even though he had told them, had not stopped his sons going quick enough, or his nephews going quick enough. But it is an illustration of some of the huge challenges that we have around us in this age in which we can insert both individual rights, my right to get on a plane and go out to Syria, upset my family, leave my family behind, but also, presumably, an economy in which those young men did not feel sufficient stake in society to stay. And that's the theme that I tend to come back to. That's the theme I talk about in my book. What people do when they don't have a stake in society. People smashed up and tore down Tottenham High Road. Not everybody, actually a very small minority of people, because they didn't feel a sufficient stake, or they didn't feel sufficient shame. It's very interesting. If you're a child psychologist, maybe one of you will be one day, round about the age of 3.5, if you tell a 3.5-year-old, I mean, some of you must have younger cousins, tell a 3.5-year-old off. The 3.5-year-old does something really weird. The 3.5-year-old puts his hand or her hands over their face, and they sometimes turn into the wall. It is the beginning of shame and guilt because of their actions. How is it that we have adults that have not discovered the notion of shame, or have lost the notion of shame, when a 3.5-year-old or a 4-year-old has that? Is it that that stake, particularly I think, and this is particularly true I think for men and boys, it doesn't really matter whether you're a black young man seduced by the worst kind of grime, hip-hop world of America and thinks it's cool to pick up a knife or a gun or whatever, or you're a white working class young man seduced by the worst EDL, BMP nonsense, or you're of Muslim background seduced by the worst and extreme and think it's okay to kill a bunch of other people. It's about that stake and the kind of society we want to create that comes back to deal with that. So I come back to my 5 things: education, employment, aspiration, community and parenting. There's a tide in our country which is a liberal tide. It's both on the left a social liberal tide and on the right an economic liberal tide. All of this basically drives individualism. And what I'm interested in as a centre-left politician is how we come back together and how we create a society. So, to my point of view, we do not dismantle the welfare state and take it back to the 1930s, which is what the Tories want to do. I don't know how many of you were here in the 1930s, or certainly have looked at history in the 1930s. It was not great. People died when they got ill. We didn't have an NHS. There was squalor and filth. Do we really want to go back to the 1930s? No, would be my answer. But my party as well needs to continue to rediscover the guts to call it for what it is. We're going into the general election, we'll see where we get to. But sometimes I disagree with the leadership of my party, and I'll continue to do that. I'm now a backbencher, so I can say what I want. And I do say what I want. I'm not subject to collective responsibility in the way that I was. That's why a few weeks ago I voted against Trident. I don't think we should spend 100 billion on nuclear weapons, is my view. I think we should spend it on all sorts of other things that are needed to us in our communities. Look, I'm going to end there because I'm sure you've got lots of questions. Thank you.